afternoon, everybody, and welcome to what is our third webinar in a series of webinars that we're facilitating here at Envision 360. Delighted to have so many people join us. The format for these sessions is that we bring in 3 guest speakers from across the world of SEND, and each deliver a 15-minute session, an information sharing session, which is 10 minutes delivery and then a short 5 minutes for a bit of Q&A as well. I'll be facilitating today's session. My name's Phil Stock, and I am CEO of a company called Envision 360, I'll tell you very briefly about in a moment. If you want to go back one slide for me, Lydia. Just there, just to give everybody, make sure you're in the right space. That is the focus of today. That's the umbrella of today's 3 sessions: impact-driven outcomes and write and send outcomes that transform lives and track progress. Okay, thanks, Lydia. Move on. Okay, so we are continuing with our webinar series. The last 2 webinars have had overwhelmingly positive feedback, and they're very much a space for shared experiences and sharing knowledge. So you can see there from the quote, tries to capture what we're trying to achieve in these forums. Shared knowledge in the SEND sector is the foundation of progress. It transforms practice, empowers people, and shapes better futures for children and young people. We've been really privileged to have some great speakers at our last 2 webinars, and that pattern continues today, and I'll introduce each of them as they come to present. We've had feedback both immediately after the webinars, but also ongoing, where we've received messages about how some of the sessions have started to impact the practice of professionals on the front line, and within different services, schools and settings. So we're delighted with that, and we hope today is no different with that. Okay, Lydia. Okay, so our agenda for this afternoon. Typically, these sessions actually fall inside the 90 minutes. We don't typically use the full quota of time. We've got a very brief intro, which we're currently in the midst of. And then we've got 3 bite-sized sessions, so 15 minutes in total. We've got Rachel, Carole and Freya today, each leading a nuanced session. I'll introduce each one individually. And at the end of each of those sessions, there will be a Q&A mechanism. At the end of today's session, what we'll do is we'll drop a survey link into the chat. And we're so grateful if it takes under 5 minutes. But what it helps us do, it really helps inform and shape how we deliver future webinars. We want these to be as meaningful and as purposeful and as well as tendered as possible. So your feedback genuinely shapes those next sessions. There'll be one exercise towards the end of the session, something on Mentimeter. It's really simple if you've got a laptop, which I presume you do, or a device, otherwise you wouldn't be accessing the session. And it just gets you to sort of give your opinion from a few multiple choice options on what we'd like to see focused on in future Envision 360 webinars. Okay, thanks, Lydia. If we move on. Super brief. So who are Envision 360 and why are we facilitating these sessions? Okay, so Envision 360, we have been operating in the SEND space since we were first sort of created, which was about 5 years ago. And it was formed following my 20+ years in local authority SEND sort of experience. I was a principal educational psychologist. I was head of inclusion services in a number of local authorities. Prior to that, I was an EP, and I was a classroom teacher prior to that. So we now, Envision 360, we work in primarily the area of SEND stroke EHCPs, trying to raise the quality and consistency. And we've got more than 60 local authorities in England now who are all utilising our software and our QA and audit modules. Thanks, Lydia. And last slide, our journey. We've come from humble beginnings with working with 2 LAs to create the software. Like I say, we're now at 60 local authorities, and our new offering that is about to launch is in the world of artificial intelligence, generative AI, to try and improve quality and consistency. But today isn't about Envision 360. Today very much is about the sector. And so that will be all you'll hear from me about Envision 360. The next element of the session is the bite-size, shared experience, knowledge sharing sessions that we're going to deliver. Okay, so our first speaker today is Rachel Wilcox, who's got over 20 years experience in children's services, initially as a qualified occupational therapist. Rachel combines a clinical experience with her strategic leadership within SEND. Lots of experience in, for example, designated clinical officer experience within what was CCGs. And importantly, Rachel was a regional SEND lead for NHS England. So her experience will directly inform her session today, which is going to focus on sort of the development and implementation of a SEND quality improvement framework. So without further ado, welcome, Rachel.
Thanks, Philip. That was a great introduction. Thanks for that. Yeah, I wanted to. So when Phil approached me about being a speaker on here, I was thinking from a strategic perspective, we often talk about children's outcomes, and rightly so, and how we write children's outcomes within it. Education, health and care plans, very important, the specific nature. But through my kind of regional and designated clinical officer work, one thing that we always had problems articulating, that I found difficult to articulate, was the impact and outcomes of service change and service improvement. So I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about a piece of work that was undertaken with the Council for Disabled Children that can add to that and really add value because it was co-produced. So next slide, please, Lydia. First and foremost, we need to think about what is the difference between quality improvement and quality assurance, because often these two terms are intertwined or used in the wrong way. And I think that that can be pretty dangerous at times, really. Quality assurance from a health perspective, but really from an all perspective, is about how we measure the process, how the system assures itself. So things like audit and self-evaluation frameworks, data mapping, that kind of thing. How well are we performing against our targets and what that looks like? Obviously, we use quality assurance processes for EHCPs and specific outcomes, but also we use those processes in a system format as well. Today, we're going to talk about very specifically quality improvement, which is the bit that sometimes that comes after that. Quality assurance flags the gaps. This is where the issues are. What are we going to do about it? Actually, we need to think about what quality improvements we can do, and therefore what impact and outcomes is that going to create for our children and young people. Next slide, please. As I was kind of on my travels when I was working for certainly the designated clinical officer role and currently in the regional role that I do, we were thinking about what is missing? Why do we need a framework? It felt like something was missing, but we couldn't quite articulate what that was, really. And what I found was often how we measure or how we identified the impact of service change was through, actually, we've seen a better data performance in this. And I constantly found myself asking the so what question. Or we'll say, actually, we've increased the number of staff in our SEND provision, or we've increased the number of therapists. And again, the question was, so what? So you've got increased capacity. What is the impact of that? And it was very difficult to articulate that from a service perspective, and particularly from a strategic perspective as well. And I think there came an opportunity to think about how do we articulate that through the eyes of parents and carers and through children and young people. And in the NHS, and if any of you have had any experience with NHS, there are about 450,000 million quality improvement frameworks, of which I have probably read quite a few of them as part of this work. And all of them rested on service improvement. So thinking about safety, patient care, the risks, capacity, workforce. What was less evident was the patient experience. Now, yes, there's patient experience frameworks and things out there, but actually, what is the experience of our children and young people, and how do we link those service improvements? Next slide, please, Lydia. So what did we do? we asked for some money first and foremost, so that we could look at commissioning some expertise from in and around our ICBs. And myself as kind of project lead, we look to think about actually how do we go about this? Where do we start? And all of us having experience in SEND, when you want a sensible answer, go and ask the parents and carers and children and young people, in my experience, particularly our parent carer networks. And it was them that we went to kind of say, look, we want to think about this. We want to think about quality and what quality means to you. How do we define quality? We can think about quality from a service perspective, but what does it actually mean? What does it look like? And what does it feel like for you? So we commissioned the Council for Disabled Children to sort of support with some of that project management, to support with the logistics and the kind of needs around how we manage it, but also so that it was accessible for all, someone to host it as well. We also commissioned the National Network of Parents and Carers, and for Children North East and the Multi-Schools Council as well. And the Children North East and Multi-Schools Council work directly with children and young people, and it was sort of really helpful to get their voice within this. We used surveys, so we surveyed 720 families, and I say we, actually the NMPCF did that work for us, and they surveyed 720 families, and we had 120 children and young people, of which 30 were from harder to reach groups, as well as non-verbal children as well. So we had a really wide and varied access to sort of voice. We didn't want to ignore the voice of professionals in this as well. So we worked alongside, we held 3 national workshops with the support of Council for Disabled Children to think about what quality meant from their perspective as well, what it meant to professionals to provide a good quality service. And we actually asked the same questions as every group. We didn't adjust those at all. And we felt that was actually really important. It was important to think about what is good quality, because I think we often talk about good quality, but what did that actually mean for them? And I was really keen to understand the opposite of that. What does it look like when things go wrong? Because it helps sort of give a bit of a measure stick around it as well. Next slide, please, Lydia. So we produced the quality improvement framework. After all of those, that took about 6 months worth of work, research, and analysis. The CDC did portion of the analysis for us, and then myself and the experts that we got from the ICB, that we commissioned from the ICB, we did a literature review, and we also analysed the interviews and the surveys. We got over 10,000 bits of data in the end, so we did have to externally commission it to do sort of a more formal evaluation to get that qualitative theme measurement as well. And I've just sort of extracted a page there. I do provide a link to where the QI tool is at the end of this presentation. I know you'll get a copy, but it talked about parents and carers define good quality as very much feeling, knowing, understanding. They were really key words that came out of that. And children and young people talked about being and understanding and included. So again, real themes. From a professionals, it was really varied, and I thought we'd see a lot more consistency from professionals. But actually, what was really helpful was thinking about them as a workforce separately. What helps you to feel like you've done a good job, you've had impact? Because again, we were able to cross-reference that with some of the experiences of children and young people, and that really helped to gather the themes in a quite a robust way. Next slide, please. Being an occupational therapist, I have to make things visual. I think any visual aid helps to understand and really embed this, but also we asked the children. So we asked the children to draw what they thought a process was, and what they thought that looked like, and the amount of plants. It wasn't necessarily just trees, but the amount of plants that we had was well, one, really. We had so many. So we picked the tree because I thought that that was a really good analogy. And thinking about that, rooted is that evidence base, and that's not an exhaustive list, obviously. We know that there's lots in there that that change, but we've got a rooted base of evidence. That the trunk that's that evidence and legislation it sits on top of is what provides our 8 key principles for quality, and that provides the solid basis on which improvement can grow and where it can grow. And eventually I'd love to add some apples on there once we understand kind of the evaluation and really feed the cycle. But I think for now that's a really good start. If we can move on, I'll talk a little bit more about the principles. Oh, that picture hasn't quite come out. I'm hoping that we can get that. But the eight principles are sort of early support, voice, the skilled workforce, joined up working, communication, accessible provision. You saw them all there on the trunk. And under each of those within the QI tool itself, it really clearly sort of states what those quality statements are. I was keen that we did provide a level of quality statement under that so that you could measure the impact against that quality statement. And so that next slide talks about actually what is the cycle? How do we even start? So that the importance to develop that quality improvement partnership. Who is going to be part of that partnership? Who is going to be part of the understanding, and what's going to be your shared principles? What are your shared outcomes, and what are those involving? And have you got parents and carers involved in that? Create a shared understanding and aim of those with that partnership. That joint planning is important, and we've provided a tool that sits alongside this quality improvement framework as well. So making sure there's joint planning and a system approach to implement it, to review it, and to evaluate it. This is not a cycle that will be a shock to anybody. It's very similar to a joint commissioning cycle, to any of the improvement cycles. We've just adapted it slightly to fit our quality narrative and to make it more accessible for people and anybody across the system. Because what I was really keen to do, or what we were really keen to do, was also support parent carer forums to be able to apply some of this to some of the things that they did as well. So it wasn't just about our systems, it was about their systems and how we integrate them, and also how we can using them next to kind of voluntary sector organisations, as well as local authority, as well as health systems. Next slide, please, Lydia. So the quality improvement planning and evaluation tool. The tool we created alongside this, and it has been tested in a number of areas, and it's certainly still sort of in its process. I would say number one, it's in a spreadsheet format, and I'm afraid I'm not a tech genius, and it was the best that we could kind of muster at the time, but full recognition really that that needs to be in a more accessible format, but it is in a spreadsheet there. It's designed to support, so the questions are asked very, very plainly. What's happening now? What do I want to achieve? How am I going to achieve it? And what does that look like? And baselining yourself. So it talks about impact within those quality statements. So the language is really clear, and the organisation is kind of that usual formatting for improvement. But it has been a challenge for areas to use, to be honest, because the language doesn't fit with our normal improvement plans. So it lacks that structure a little bit, which areas have found difficult, but actually parents and carers have found really accessible. So I think that speaks to something about when we write improvement plans and actually making them accessible and understandable to our parents and carers. There is a strong feeling that this plan, or the impact plan, is an addition, and I can fully recognise that. But until we get used to writing impact and outcomes for services, we need to find a way to articulate that better. And it's been fed back to me that there is a value in the tool of being able to articulate it within those 8 key principles, and that having a real direct impact statement when it comes to things like your self-evaluation frameworks and that system-wide thinking, really. So that's the QI framework, and there's a link there. So that should be a live link when these get shared. It is on the CDC website. If you literally say and pop in send quality improvement framework, it's in there. So and the tool is in there too. So do go and have a little look at it.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I know there's a lot of education professionals, including myself, on this course, so it's fantastic to get some insight actually into sort of how systems, processes, quality improvement frameworks are sort of developed in health and in ICBs. Great to see your partnership work in there as well, Council of Disabled Children, and obviously all of the principles like co-production. They transcend individual service areas, right? They should be paramount and integral to SEND practice. So that was fantastic.
Philip, just to add as well, this is going to sit alongside a quality assurance framework for ICBs as well. That's in development at the moment, and we've just gone through formal evaluations, so that will be live on CDC website in July. So the two will sit side by side.
Fabulous. I know that's really good intel. It actually taps into a question in the chat in terms of will the slides be emailed out? Yes, absolutely. All the slides for today will be emailed to all attendees today. But also what we'll do is within that network, if things follow up, like links are produced or follow on documents or systems, we'll make sure in time to send them out as well. One minor housekeeping thing. I saw a couple of people, it seemed minor, and from the response, it does look minor. There were some issues with audio. If you do, just pop something in the chat. We'll see if we can get it resolved. But it seems like the majority are absolutely fine on that. Any questions or comments? You can put them in the chat now. You can put them as speakers are speaking. Anything you'd like more insight or some QAs to our presenters, do feel free to pop that in. But yeah, it's really important for us to have a breadth of insight, so to have healthier represented, particularly Rachel with that regional NHS SEND lead role. It's really, really insightful and really powerful for us. So a big thank you to Rachel, and thanks so much for putting that together and sharing with our wider audience. And for the audience, for everybody who's here, Rachel has made a special effort to be here. She's at a very special event with her daughter today and has taken time out to present today. So a massive thank you, Rachel. Okay, we're going to move on to our second speaker today. So I'm delighted to introduce Carole Lewis, who's going to speak to us today around her experience with outcomes. Carole comes with a wealth of experience, over 20 years experience within education and SEND, going back from her teaching days to being leading services, inclusion advisory service. It was a very successful inclusion advisory service that did some really sort of innovative work. I know that firsthand because I had some direct work with that service at the time. So I know just what a fantastic leader Carole is and what the essence of what she's about in terms of advocating for children and young people with additional needs. So Carole as well has provided mentorship to other LAs and has used her expertise to try and drive practice wider than an individual local authority in terms of regional and national level. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Carole, who's going to talk about the importance of effective and impact-driven outcomes within a multidisciplinary context as well. So Carole, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. That's a very nice introduction there. So as Phil said, I'll probably be talking from an education perspective. So we've had the health perspective, which is really interesting. But I suppose I'm speaking from an education perspective, but also from a local authorities perspective as well. So next slide, please. So just thinking about the graduated approach. So if we're thinking about how do we think about developing those outcomes, how do we know what it is that we want to work with? So thinking from a child-centered perspective, what do we want that child to achieve? So whether that's in life, whether that's in school, whether that's across the piece. So thinking about that whole graduated approach. I'm aware that some people will know what this is and some people may not. But that's thinking about what do we put in place first to enable that child to achieve, and then what else do we need to layer upon that to enable that child to achieve. And it's about that assess, plan, do, review. So the assessment is getting a holistic understanding of that child's needs. It's about working with education, social care, health, and working together to really put in place a plan around producing smart outcomes, which I'll talk about a little bit in a second. But that's about, when we say co-producing, that's with the child and that's also with the family as well. It's really important to make sure that all of that feeds through everything that we're doing. And then it's about how we implement the support, because if we're thinking about the quality and the consistency of delivery, they affect the ultimate outcomes. And then it's thinking about how we review that. So evaluating progress, if outcomes are not being met, what's the next step and what do we do to help that child to achieve that? So all of that's really important for developing those outcomes. It gives more accurate identification of needs, better targeted support, stronger progress tracking, and then it impacts upon long-term independence and well-being as well for the child. So next slide, please. So then thinking about how do we actually assess the needs, I think we all know about formative, summative and diagnostic assessment. All of those should formulate the information that you're gathering to set those outcomes for the child. It's thinking also about all of those formulation software that we could use, digital expertise, observations of teachers' assessments, standardized assessments. But it's that feedback again from parents and the students, and then working across the piece, across the different elements. But it's also thinking about those small steps of progress. So how are you gathering those small steps of progress? So when a child is working towards something, how are you gathering that? So that could be, so from a local authority perspective, what we introduced was something called SCERTS, and that's around looking at social communication, emotional regulation, and then how we as individuals support that child, and that's the transactional support. So thinking from a local authority perspective, what is it that you're sharing with the schools and with the education to enable that small steps of progress to be tracked and then use that to inform what your outcomes might be. And then the sort of smart outcomes side of things, so thinking about smart outcomes, we need to be thinking about, are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they relevant? And are they time bound? And I think that is what we really need to be thinking about when we're formulating some of our outcomes. The next slide, please. So this is just one of the SCERTS progress trackers that we use for active engagement. I've just put it in here as an example. So we're looking at different areas of active engagement, and we are identifying specific target areas for that child, and then we can measure that across time over a year's progress. So looking at term 1, term 2 and term 3, and then using that to inform our outcomes that we're setting, long-term outcomes, and even some of those more short-term outcomes. So it's what do you have in place to track that progress of the child, which is used then to inform. If anybody wants to talk to me a little bit more about SCERTS and how we use that within a local authority, then just get in contact with me through Phil, and I'm happy to have a chat with anybody around that, but a really useful way of working with children. Next slide, please. So then thinking about why is working collaboratively important? It's really important. And I think our colleague also from health there talked about that a little bit, Rachel. So it's important because we need to be thinking about gaps in coordination. That's been identified as weakness. And then stronger external support networks. They facilitate greater support, and then improves planning and identification. And then thinking also about the inspection framework, and many of you are probably from local authorities, and I'm talking from a local authority perspective. It really does think about local partnerships, multidisciplinary inspections, the real life impact on the child, and then how we then strengthen accountability and continuous improvement. So that's really important in getting those outcomes right, so that that child's journey can be tracked, and then how are they making progress towards those outcomes. So really important. Next slide, please. And then thinking about the trajectory, so the massive impact on children. So if we get those outcomes correct, and we're working together to achieve those outcomes, then we can make a huge impact on the child. And also bringing in those different therapies, educational psychology, that builds a 360-degree view of that child. So everybody's working together. More identification of barriers, more tailored support is available, and then it can impact upon educational engagement, improve mental health, independence, and also we know children risk of exclusion. So if we get those right and working together, we can prevent some of those exclusions and that school to prison line that we all know about as well. Next slide, please. And then how do we bring that all together? So how do we're working all separately with these children, but bringing it together with the team around the child. I think this is really important.
Carole, I think you've hit your mute button.
I have, thank you.
There we go. Only the last 10 seconds.
Last 10 seconds. It's around the team, around the child. So thinking about how we all come together and we work together. I'm just thinking about Brenner's ecological systems theory. It's about how all of those different systems fit together to make better improvements for that child's life journey. So the TAC process is about bringing everyone together, looking at shared goals and outcomes, having regular review meetings, and whether you're going with an EHCP or whether it's a My Support Plan, but something should be in place to collate all of that information, looking from the child's perspective, family's perspective, but also from an education perspective. So it's really important to use a TAC process when there's complex needs, and also it reduces duplication and gaps in support, and it builds trust with families. So next slide, please. So then how do we think about this, and how is the SEND Code of Practice informing all of this? There's lots of information in the SEND Code of Practice, but it's about defining what difference can be made to an individual outcome, individual child as a result of intervention. It's about being smart, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, and then thinking about that young person's needs and aspirations, clear and concise on what they need. So that's coming from the SEND Code of Practice. We want to look at equity and justice rather than just giving each child the same thing. So how does it relate to that child? Next slide, please. So thinking about how we formulate some of our outcomes then, this is something that I work towards, and it's called the outcome sandwich. You may or may not have heard of it before, but it's a really good visual and linguistic tool for constructing clear, measurable and purposeful outcomes. So it makes sure that it's specific and time-bound, but it's also that it's meaningful for that child as well. So thinking about, I'll go through it in a little bit more detail, but it's thinking about that top slice is the timescale and the child's name. So you're informing that it's personalised. You're looking at the skill or the behaviour that you want to change and that you want to measure. And then the bottom slice is about making it really purposeful and the real life function. So what does that mean for that child? And I think that's something that's sometimes forgotten when we're formulating outcomes, is that so what? So what is this going to do for this child as well? So if we're thinking about Nyla, by the end of the summer term, Nyla will be able to identify and name 3 different emotions she is feeling during daily check-ins in order that she can express her emotional needs and access support. So it's really giving a reason for that. Next slide, please. Just checking you can still hear me. Okay, so thinking about that
We're
outcome
getting close to
sandwich.
the end of 10 minutes as well.
Perfect.
Just a quick minute warning. Thanks,
Nearly there. I'm nearly there. So thinking about that sandwich, so the top slice is about the time scale. It's realistic and it's got to be aligned with review periods. The fill-in is what is it they will be able to do. So what is the skill that you're measuring? And it has to be measurable through a observation or assessment, and it should be linked to provision. So if we're thinking about what is it that you're going to do about it, and we're thinking about that whole golden the golden thread that goes through it, how are we going to then measure that? And then the bottom bit is about how that prepares that child for adulthood. Next slide, please. So that's talking about that golden thread, really. And it's something that's really key that we need to be thinking about. How do the aspirations feed into the outcomes? How do those needs formulate the basis of the outcomes? And then what is the provision that's going to be put in place? So thinking about Ella, so this is from a cognition and learning perspective. You will get these slides so you can look at them and how those have been formulated. But it's thinking about long-term outcomes, short-term outcomes, how they fit together. And as you can see there, it's really about looking at making them sure that they're measurable and they're purposeful for that child. Next slide, please. And then it's thinking about reviewing outcomes. So we all know that EHCPs have annual reviews and that we have to think about what we do about that information as well. But it's not just about EHCPs, it's about the child and the support that's needed as well. How do we monitor that progress? How frequently is that done? And how we, again, coming back together as a team around the child to be able to work together. And it's about thinking about what do we do with that information as well after that. That's it, I think. Next slide. I think that's where I finished. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Carole.
It
was great to hear and hear the language in terms of purposeful outcomes, following the golden thread, aspirations, all of those important sort of labels we hear, but it's about everyday practice and trying to get that in to everyday practice to make sure the so what component is met. It was interesting to see the outcome sandwich. I've not seen that before. I like that. I'm open and form to questions. One question has come in, and it sort of refers to the fact or references that this seems fantastic and the principles are great, but in everyday practice, the individual in the question has talked about the limited resources in their secondary provision, the amount sort of demands versus capacity. How can we get this into everyday practice?
Yes, one of my slides, which I cut, has a SMART outcomes. It's almost like a planning grid. And I think once you've got a setup and you have something in place that everyone's working towards and working together, so a SMART outcome grid, a planning tool is really useful because you start to then get a pattern in place, and you can develop that and share that across your different areas, because obviously a child in secondary is going across different provisions as well. So that's really useful. And also to think about my support plan. So it's not just about EHCPs, is developing that so that you're just telling it once, so that follows that child through his journey, her journey within a secondary school. I understand that, there is huge pressures and trying to get those outcomes really specific to what I'm presenting there. But again, like I say, if you have a template available to you and then you think about it, it becomes second nature to do that really quickly.
Thanks, Carole. I think as well, you referenced in your slides frameworks to support you as well, the SCERTS framework, which has got a strong evidence base behind as well, which are really supportive and can give examples and sort of navigate that. There was a follow-up question that says, well, actually the question in terms of resource and time, how do we think about multidisciplinary engagement and collaboration with such demands such as time and people's availability?
Yeah, again, I do appreciate that, and I know it's very difficult. So working from an education and a local authority perspective, I see both sides of the coin. But I suppose we have to prioritise identifying children with the most complex needs, and that we want to pull together all of that information. Again, there could be a template. Do you have a set template that goes out to therapies, to educational psychology, so that you are gaining what you need? Often we get a lot of evidence supplied to us. Maybe I'm just thinking of EHC needs assessments, for example. Sometimes we get 80 pages submitted, when actually all we need is probably about 5. So it's being really purposeful and focused on what is it you need to be able to formulate that outcome for that child, and having a set template for all of those different services that are working around that child would be really purposeful and supportive, I believe.
Yeah, and good points, Carole. And I think the essence of the sector that we're all working in SEND, we know it's a sector with limited resource but huge demand, and it's really trying to work as efficiently and as smartly as we can, but knowing the constraints we're under, and it's about aspiring to best practice, but accepting at times that best practice won't always be hit purely due to the capacity and resource that's available. But it's that aspirational, are we getting closer to that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Carole. That was a fabulous session. Really appreciate it. And it allows me now to finally introduce our third and final speaker today, and that is Freya Bendleton, who's going to focus on developing and monitoring SEND outcomes. Freya's got a wealth again of experience across SEND, 15 years experience, has worked as SENCO, designated safeguarding lead. Freya was she managed the SENDIAS, for those who know, SEND Information Advice and Support Service as well, working directly with parents and carers, holding services to account to make sure children and young people got what they needed. And Freya is currently leading on SEND and inclusion at MIAG, which is an alternative learning provision. So without further ado, welcome Freya, and over to you.
Hi there. Thanks. Yeah. So that's who I am. Sort of as a brief history. So I was SENCO and safeguarding lead in primary schools, and then I managed SENDIAS, which is SEND Information Advice and Support, for 6 years, and now I've gone back to the SEND and safeguarding lead role again, which has been really interesting. And where I am now is all through, so it sort of gives the both sides of the coin, and the primary and secondary and post 16 view on EHCPs and SEND. So yeah, next slide, please, Lydia. So sort of thinking about this, I can't move away from SENDIAS and talking about the law. And Carole's gone through essentially some of the same things that I have here, but in terms of Section E and EHCPs and the law behind those, and that's the Children and Families Act and the SEND regulation. So Regulation 12 covers the legal aspect of Section E, which is, as it is on the slide, when preparing an EHC plan, a local authority must set out the outcome sought for him or her. And sort of that SEND yes view on things is the law is the law. That's what's required. That's what must happen. The SEND Code of Practice then goes into quite a lot more detail about Section E and outcomes, and then being an outcome being defined as the benefit or difference made to an individual as a result of an intervention. And that part is sort of what I'm going to focus on, is how we make it clear to children, young people, and involve them in what that benefit's going to be for them. Next slide, please. So that paragraph, which I think was 9.66, but it's on slides, carries on into it should be personal and not expressed from a service perspective. It should be something that those involved have control and influence over. And while it does not always have to be formal or accredited, it should be smart. And what I found across sort of the variety of settings is that good EHCPs, and they are good and they do achieve what they're set out to do, focus a lot on being smart, and that specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, all relevant, and either are works and time bound. You see them come through a lot, and it's good, and they're positive and they work, and that's what professionals are focused on, sort of over the time that I've been specifically in SENDIAS. I've seen a lot of progress in that and sitting in things like multi-agency quality assurance and those quality sort of improvement frameworks, how we get professionals to write more smart outcomes and move that on so that EHCPs can be outcome focused and schools have got that direction and parents understand. Next slide, please. But what I see or where I've seen that breakdown is that link between section A and that golden thread not getting all the way through to section E. So section A, again, in sort of the things I've sat in, there's been lots of focus on all about me's and developing those at a school level, at a SEND support level, how they pull through into EHC needs assessments and making sure those all about me's are really robust, that schools have got the tools set out by local authorities to gain those views, that's involved all the way through. But by the time it's sort of got halfway through the EHCP and we're looking at outcomes, often they are lifted directly from professional reports. And sometimes those will have had involvement directly with children and young people, but particularly in statutory assessment timeframes. Often the involvement's at the beginning, and then by the time professionals writing outcomes, children and young people aren't involved in those bits. And sort of when I was approached about this webinar, it was, okay, how do we talk about making sure that when we're being outcome focused, those outcomes are really relevant and co-produced with children and young people? So next slide, please. So I was thinking then about what that participation looks like and how we use tools as professionals to think about how we're involving children and young people and when they can be fed in. But if I think about the co-production meetings I've been in, the annual reviews I've been in, sort of quality assurance, where are children in those rooms? Where are children in those spaces? And when I'm talking about those spaces, I'm talking about in the different sections of the plan, and where that hits sort of in line with the ladder of participation. So this is HEART's ladder of participation. There's sort of one overarching one. Some of you will know more about it than others, but it's roughly this. There are various different versions as applied to different sectors. But the bottom three rungs of the ladder are manipulation, which is just sort of convincing children and people or people in general. Decoration, which is having them space, but not really taking part. And when I reflect on annual reviews that I've held prior to sort of doing the SENDS role, actually often children are involved in some of the annual review, or they're in the room, but they are not taking part. And then the next step from that, which is tokenism, which is when they might be involved in some of a meeting about them, but not all of it. And the ladder of participation sort of view is actually that those bottom three aren't participation at all. That it's not co-production. It's not moving that ladder towards that nothing about me without me kind of idealism. So then we're looking at the next five rungs, and that's children and people being informed. And the part I think about when I'm thinking that is, are we writing outcomes that children and young people can understand? Do they know what that outcome means? Because if they can't understand it, then it's not an outcome that they'll be able to engage in. You know, if they can't understand it, then it's not meaningful to them, full stop. The second rung of meaningful participation then being the children and people being informed, but also consulted. Where's their choice in this? Have we got their views? Have we spoken to them about it? Then there's sort of the adult initiated part, which is the step up from there. So if I'm trying to think of examples, if you're thinking about speech and language and you're talking to a young person actually about which of these things that we want to achieve for you is most important now. So the adult's leading that conversation, and that can happen at any point sort of along it. You know, we can have, and I'm going back to that comment about when do you get the time to get that meaningful thing? The pressures of the system mean you might not be able to have a full multi-agency meeting and a child or young person stay engaged throughout it to talk about their outcomes and all of the provision. You know, they're lengthy for professionals, they're lengthy for parents, but breaking it down and going, okay, we're going to try and achieve these for you. This is the support, it's leading to this. Are you happy with that? And then when we're thinking, actually, there are some children and young people who have EHCPs or high levels of support because they're highly anxious, but actually they're very academically able and they can really identify what they want if they're with a safe adult. And actually, sometimes those things can be at those top 2 rungs of initiated by them. You know, what do you want to achieve? One of the things that I'm reflecting on with my ag is we have children and young people who are highly anxious, but they are really driven in that they know they need to get their qualifications to get to college. They are driving themselves towards that goal because they're capable. They just need the small supportive environment. But actually, when I read their EHCPs, it doesn't necessarily reflect that. And I can see that this is something that's been written without them there. So, you know, in terms of that, the ladder of participation is a tool, and it's just something to kind of shape our thinking specifically around outcomes, although it is relevant in every part, but about how we get children involved or what their thoughts are on it. So next slide, please. So these are just some examples of outcomes that I pulled from EHCPs I've seen. And it's just sort of a thing to think about, really. But I've got a few questions that I thought about that when I have in my SENDS role sat in co-productions or annual reviews, and we've spoken about outcomes. It's the first one is are these SMART outcomes? And some of these, you know, you'll immediately see aren't. So we'll be able to recognise how he feels and express this appropriately. There's no time frame around that. It's not particularly measurable. You know, whether or not it's achievable it depends on the situation. Was the child or young person involved in the creation of these outcomes? So will develop knowledge of social communication and have increased awareness of body language, facial expressions, intonation and prosody. That one, I mean, I know the young person it's written about, but they certainly weren't involved in that. You know, that would mean almost nothing to them. I'm not sure I know what prosody means. So, you know, that bit is were they involved? Do they know what the benefit would be? Do you think that they'd think that this is a relevant thing to do? Reporting finding something enjoyable or having succeeded at something in school every day. Do they understand the relevance of that? Did they have any choice in what we are trying to achieve for them? Do they understand it? There's those 3 there, and they were sort of more SEMH ones. And then next slide, please. I've got another sort of 3 there. And these 3 I picked out because, again, it's thinking about that bit of, are these personalised or are they service-led? So accessing full-time education, well, that's a goal. Obviously, we want all children to be accessing full-time education. But comfortable working alongside peers, is that something that young person wants? And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we need to find that balance between what we know is best for a child or young person and what they want for themselves. But sometimes you read an EHCP and you can tell that this is all service-led. Being able to sit in a classroom for 45 minutes and complete a teacher-led lesson, finishing work and writing in line with age, you know, that young person, I'm not sure they would want that. You know, that this person, again, is somebody I know, but I know that their sort of aim is actually not to be in classroom lessons. That if they could be, they would be, but that their last few years have been spent trying to avoid this specific situation where they're sat in a classroom for 45 minutes and completing a teacher-led lesson, finishing work and writing in line with age. So it's just those sort of questions that I ask myself if I'm in those situations. And I think it's useful to think about, because especially where we are working on live EHCPs or ones that are being reviewed, it's actually how can we as professionals do the work to get that child either back in the room physically or at least their views or what we know about them in there, and making it more child focused. Next slide, please. And I think the vehicle for that is through annual reviews. At a local authority level, involving children in that co-production would fantastic, and it's great when it works, but also with outcomes, when we've got fresh professional advice, you know, hopefully that has happened throughout, that children have been involved, they've been included, they've been given those choices and chance to have their voice heard through that process. But when we're 3 years into an EHCP and an EP hasn't seen them in that time, actually it's being led by schools and those people leading annual reviews to say, does this child or young person know about their outcomes? Do I think they still reflect their aspirations? When I look at these outcomes compared to the All About Me, does this seem like the same child? And who has asked those questions? And I think from a school level as Senkos, it's making sure that when we're sort of doing that in terms of, okay, it's the annual reviews coming up. Have we got an update All About Me? Does this young person want to engage in that? Who's their safe person to talk to this about? It's doing that review of their outcomes with them at the same time and starting to build that understanding of EHCPs. And, you know, hopefully then the impact of that is that we've got young people that also are working towards the same outcomes as us. Because otherwise we're as professionals working on this level up here, and the young people are working sometimes towards something completely different over here. And it's far more successful when we're all on the same page. Sorry, I've just looked at chat and I've just said, Siobhan has said, we can't get EPs. And that is part of it, isn't it? Is that we know that the challenges are so high. So it's what we can do at that level and where we can feed it in to get those views of children and young people. And when you're Senko in a school, you know what their views are. Sometimes they'll yell at you if you're lucky, but sometimes you get the picture of them. And behavior is communication as much as anything else is. As I said about the person who absolutely does not want to spend 45 minutes in a classroom with peers doing an adult-led task. He hasn't said that to me. He's just demonstrated it with his behaviour. But there are lots of other ways of engaging him in learning. And actually that outcome could be shifted into something that is meaningful to him. You know, why do we want you engaged in learning? What do you want to achieve out of it? And focusing on that. So yes, I think I've been quicker than my 10 minutes, Phil. And sorry, that's because I speak at the speed of light. But
no, perfect timing. Thanks, Freya. That was a really powerful piece, actually, about the young person very much being at the centre and at the heart of everything. I love the ladder of participation and the aspirational to get as high up that ladder as possible. It comes back to the points made in Carole's session as well, which was around that purposeful outcomes as well, which is fantastic. And the distinction of what's important to the young person, what's important for them, all of those things to think about. I think, as you picked up in the chat, there's an essence here which we completely understand, and that is the availability of services and resources when capacity across local areas is so incredibly thin. There's a comment there in terms of we're writing and we're producing and developing powerful, accurate, purposeful outcomes, but if they're not updated in the young person's EHCP, it's really, really difficult, stroke frustrating, and so forth. Absolutely. And the same with access to those professionals who you want to feed and feel appropriate and relevant to feed in, access to those services. We're in a sector that is really, really under massive strain. We know in the autumn there's going to be some announcements potentially about how the current government feel in line with their fee that improvements can be made, but we're all on the same page in respect of that. So it's about really focusing about what we have on autonomy we have, and participation in producing outcomes is something we have autonomy over as frontline professionals, and we should aspire to do. But thank you, Freya. Like I say, really powerful, really child-centered, a really nice session to sort of finish the 3. What we're going to do, we've still got a lot of you on the call, which is great. Don't disappear anywhere. We got one next slide is going to be, you're going to use your device and you're going to go to something called Menti, MENTI. If you type in Menti and then code, CODE, into Google, Safari, Edge, whatever, it'll come to a page where you have to give a code. Lydia, I can't see the code on screen.
Yeah, my technical ability has hit a wall. Let me just find it for you one moment.
And then if while Lydia's doing that, if you could just go Google, Safari, whatever, type into your browser MENTI, Menti, and then space, put code, you should get to a page which is asking you for a code, which Lydia is going to provide for us. And then it's going to give you an opportunity then to share or vote with a poll on what you think would be great or most purposeful for our next webinar in terms of an umbrella theme. Aha, there's our code. We have
By magic.
1540 4236. I think we can all appreciate, Lydia, the moments of your heart racing then when you couldn't get the code up. So well done. Appreciate it. So 1540 4236. It's also in the chat. If you go to, I'll type where you go, menti.com, and we're starting to see some responses come through now. Fantastic. And you can see that live, people, as people are voting on what we're going to utilize for our next webinar. Normally this was in the survey, but we thought it'd be a nice activity for you guys to see yourselves. We can see those numbers are growing. Currently we've got, it might change, but currently we've got a large proportion, 30+%, I'm not going to say any more than that, for EHCP templates, exploring a national / regional template. Closely behind is AI in the content of assessment and EHCP plan development. So that's fantastic. You can continue to vote on that, and that will come through. The final piece we're going to go, oh, it's looking strong there, is a feedback survey, and Lydia's going to drop that into the chat. Genuinely, it will take less than 5 minutes to complete. We'll always make sure we finish early to give you the opportunity to complete it. It gives us real insight in terms of shaping these webinars. We're committed to continuing with providing our series of webinars, continuing to providing sort of a range of speakers from across the sector. Lydia, are you able to drop that link in the chat? You're probably busy trying to do it, and I'm just adding more pressure. There it is. So there is a survey link in the chat. If you could complete that, we would be so grateful. It will not take long at all. The last thing I would like to do is to thank our 3 speakers today, Rachel, Carole and Freya, for some really powerful insights, some fantastic knowledge sharing, and we're delighted to have been able to host today. And lastly, I'd like to thank, who never gets a thank you actually in these forums, is Lydia. Lydia has put together an unbelievable webinar series. She's done this single-handedly. She does all of the marketing around it, all of the coordination, all of engaging and accessing our fantastic speakers. So Lydia, I think you should put your camera on and just so people can see who you are as well. But thank you, Lydia. But yeah, thanks everybody. Lastly, thanks everybody for attending. It's great to have such a great audience and a large number of people coming to give up their time to hear a little bit more about practicing SEND. So thanks everyone. Keep an eye out for the slides that will come in due course, and also information about future webinars that are coming in the next session.